Hello, lovely people. Welcome to another episode of CoachesCorner.health. I am one of your hosts. My name is Leslie Gadet. I'm a mindset and emotional awareness coach for mission driven women who want to make a bigger impact in the world by pursuing their passion project or exploring entrepreneurship. And I show them that it's possible to have both, that they don't have to choose because when they develop an unstoppable mindset and learn how to manage their emotions, again, and protecting their time, it's possible to keep doing what they love, get things done more efficiently, and still spend quality time with their loved ones. Andy, over to you.
Yes, I love that. I always love hearing that. I'm Andy Lidstone. I'm the unconditional coach. I help people with boundaries on a basic level. I had a recent conversation with a friend of mine who kind of initiated this topic we're talking about today. And as an unconditional coach, I don't have any requirements for making some unusual arrangements with my clients in order to be able to offer them the help they're looking for. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's a good one.
Yeah, I'm
And
really
thank you.
excited. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
excited. So, this is your topic, Andy. So, I'm going to let you take the lead. Well, it's not that I let you take the lead, but I am going to graciously pass the baton over to you.
Yeah. Um, so, would you continue your relationship if they don't change?
Mm,
Um,
loaded question.
yeah. So, it's commonly understood that men like to fix things. I say commonly understood because my personal experience with clients is that it's just as common that women do that as men. It's not actually a man characteristic. However, it is a characteristic that men do as much or more as than women do. So, and the question I asked this friend of mine is, do you want to fix her or teach her, or do you want to love her? You can't do both. And he's like, that tripped him up. He's like, what do you mean I can't do both? And then later on in the conversation, he's like, yeah, and she doesn't feel loved, and she doesn't feel heard, and she doesn't feel supported. And I'm like, yeah, that's because you're teaching her. I mean, that's what I mean by you can't do both.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, this is the question. So I asked him, I said, would you continue your relationship if she didn't change? And I've asked this of men, I've asked this of women, and it's funny the variety of answers I get to that question. It's a hard question for most people to answer.
Mm, yeah. And I think too, one of the reasons why I think it's a really difficult question, because when we're attracted to someone in the very first place, all of the quirks that might bother us now that we're trying to fix, to change, they didn't seem to bother us so much in the beginning puppy love
Right,
stages, right? But all of a
right.
sudden you settle in, you get really comfortable with one another. And it's almost like now you put the magnifying glass on all of those little things that start to bother you. And I really
Yes,
think that it's not really about them, it's actually about you.
right.
And but you're reflecting it back on them as if there's something about whatever it is that they do that never used to bother you before, and now you think you have to fix it.
Right.
But I also know that there are some women, and again, you've talked about men as well, but I know some women who've actually gone into relationships thinking, well, there is this about him, but I know I can fix it. And I'm thinking, well, if you're already going in thinking that you have a fixer upper, you're going to have some issues there because it's not the same as fixing a house that has no say. Now you've
Yeah.
got an actual human being that you're trying to like change. And how do you even try to do that? And the second part to that is, what if they actually do change to the way you like? Is that going to be enough? Because then you're going to start looking at other things and think that's not enough. So then they believe that they're not enough and they'll never be good enough. And you get
Right.
down that whole rabbit hole. So it's quite interesting,
Yeah.
when you think about it from that perspective.
Yeah. And I like the house analogy because my parents bought a fixer upper when I was a teenager, and when they ended up fixing it up and ended up with a house that they actually enjoyed that could fit all of us kids and and had all the characteristics they wanted, it didn't feel like the cozy old home that they bought in the first place. Like, it did change the personality of the home. So even with a house that doesn't have a say, you're still not going to get the same person when you fix it, right? And it's the same connection in a relationship. If you go into a relationship wanting to fix somebody, or if you want to fix something after you're in the relationship, you're not showing up in that relationship the same way you did when you started, or the same way that you want to, or especially the same way you want them to.
Mm-hmm.
When we go into, especially romantic relationships, when we go into especially romantic relationships, we want to be supported and loved. We want all the warm and fuzzy feelings, right? That's what we're looking for. We want intelligence, conversations. We want, fulfilling interactions. We do want the intimacy. We want all that stuff too. But it's the same thing in professional and platonic relationships. It's the same thing in virtually any relationship. What we're looking for isn't someone to teach or someone to teach us. I
Mm-hmm.
don't go into most relationships looking for somebody to teach me. Or if I do, I'm looking specifically for a teacher or a mentor or a coach or somebody like that, an authority figure. I'm asking them to be an authority figure. And if that's the case, then that's understood. But 95% of platonic and professional and romantic relationships, we're not looking for that. And especially romantic relationships, we're not looking for that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it complicates the relationship dramatically when that wasn't the point of the relationship in the first place. When my best friend and I get into a conversation where I'm teaching him or he's teaching me, this was a bone of contention we had for about 2 years, when he asked me for help, and then I continued to fix him in that sense. Because sometimes he wanted me to just be his best friend, and then we'd be, sitting there playing video games or something, and he would make some comment about his girlfriend that is clearly a mindset thing, like
Mm-hmm.
a hookup, that he just didn't understand. That I would explain, that is part of what I was talking about, and he'd be like, "I get it," and he would get right into the conversation from a student point of view, and then he would wonder why I was teaching him, because he would ask me questions, and I'm like, "We need to set some boundaries here. If you want me to help you, I can put on my coach hat and help you. But if you want to just have fun and play video games, don't ask me about your relationship, because I'm going to get into it if you ask." Right.
Yeah.
And eventually I even stopped that. Eventually, even when he did ask, I stopped offering, unless he specifically said, "Okay, Andy, I want you to help me with this now." Right. And so when he started talking about his relationship, I would say things like, "Yeah, and I can help you with that," or, "If you want help with that, let me know. If this is something you want to just talk about, I can listen. But if it's something you want to change, let me know. We can do that too." And it
Yeah.
took him another 6
Mm-hmm.
months or so before he started realizing that, yeah, most of the time he was asking for help. And it's a different dynamic in the relationship, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship. It's just a completely different dynamic. And that's where the question comes in: would you be in that relationship if they didn't change that characteristic?
Well, here's the
Would you?
other part to that too, I think, is that there is also the other person actually has to want to change. um, and there's sometimes they're not even really, I believe, aware that you're trying to change them in the first place. So
Right.
what you perceive as you trying to help them, they're looking at it as you trying to change them, which is changing
Yeah.
who they are, which is them being pulled kicking and screaming into a life or a lifestyle that they didn't sign up for. So
Right.
it's like there's that whole area around that too. I think that when we get into relationships, the hard part, I think, is the longevity piece of it, because
Yes.
it's not just like in the beginning. Yeah, it's fun. It's like it's really super romantic. You're excited to see each other, and then you start to like settle into the getting into your emotions and start really deeper, and then starting to talk about life and maybe spending your life with each other, and then maybe you go down that path and you start spending your life with them, and
Right.
now then all of a sudden, once you start going into, maybe for as an example, one party decides they want to change themselves, then all of a sudden their partner no longer matches them anymore, because they might have gone down a self-development journey. In this case, I'm going to use myself as an example, because I started doing my self-development journey 5 years ago, and I started becoming a completely different person. Now, it's almost like the other parties are going to start looking at you like, well, I married you as this person. You didn't ask me that you if it was okay with me that you changed from being that person that I knew.
Right.
And now, and even if it is to better yourself and you do become a better human being, you still have something that's different about you, that now you're looking at your partner and it's almost like you're out of alignment in a way, but
Yeah.
that's just because maybe you're not giving them the benefit of what, you went through something, and you're not maybe
Right.
giving them a chance to have that decision, to make the decision. Do they desire to do things differently?
Right.
And then, do you guys still match together? So it can be really super scary, and I think it could possibly, people could part ways because of one
Yeah.
person becoming completely different, and now you both look at each other like, you don't look the same anymore to me. Even though I might love you, you don't look the same, you don't talk the same, you don't act the same. And so again, that then lends into your question of this live video around, would you continue a relationship if they didn't
Right.
change? Well, how about, would you continue the relationship if they did? Because
Right.
that's the flip side to that.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Like, for example, what you're talking about is, you had the question once you got into your personal development journey, you had the question of yourself, would I stay in this relationship because he's not changing? And
Mhm.
then after a while, he also had the same question. You've become a different person. Does he want to stay? Right. So both sides of the equation get the same question. Do I want to stay? And these are the questions that I try and encourage couples to ask early in the relationship, in the part of the relationship where they're considering a commitment. Whether they actually get married, or decide to live together long term, or have children, or whatever, is a different thing. I'm not asking them to commit, but when they're considering commitment, when they're considering marriage or children, or whatever those things are that connect them for life. Before we do that, let's consider: do I want to be with this person if they change? And if they change, am I willing to do what it takes to keep the relationship together? And if they don't change, am I willing to do what it takes to keep the relationship together? Right? Do I want to choose, even though they have these characteristics that I might prefer they changed, or maybe it's quite strongly an opinion that I need them to change it? In those cases, that's where commitment comes in. This is where the idea of, I'm with you regardless, no matter what happens. And this is where the traditional marriage vows come in, sickness and health, and rich and poor, and all that sort of stuff. Is, I'm with you no matter what. And we don't usually completely consider what that actually means. Now, I'm not suggesting that couples should stay together if one of them starts smacking the other one around, or if one of them's got some, major abusive problems. I'm not suggesting we should stick together. I'm suggesting we should make that choice, though. We should make some choices as to which conditions we'll stay under and which conditions we won't. If my partner suddenly starts leaving the cap off the toothpaste, am I going to leave because of that? If my partner suddenly decides, I want to sleep in a separate bed, do I want to leave because of that? If my partner suddenly decides that I want a job out of town, that I'm out of town for a month at a time, do I want to leave because of that? Many relationships have split up because of that reason. And the separate beds thing too. I've got two friends who said, I would never sleep in a separate bedroom. If I did, I would rather leave. And yet I know plenty of couples who sleep in separate bedrooms. And not because either one of them is unfaithful to the other, just that there are sleeping habits that they have that they don't share. That there are characteristics that they don't share. So, these are the kinds of questions we get to ask ourselves. And I don't think enough of us, when we're in relationships, ask those kinds of questions. And it's the same thing with friendships. When we've been friends with somebody for, a couple of years, a few years, a dozen years, we're reluctant to let go of those friendships. If I just had another friend of mine who quit his job after 12 years last year. And he misses a lot of the people he works with. And as he's going to look for other jobs, as he's working in other places, he's like, I don't know if I can work with these people for that long. So these are the kinds of questions that we get to ask ourselves. What characteristics are you willing to stick around under? And which characteristics are you willing to, are you saying, no way, this is good, I gotta go. I think it's important for us to consider those conditions before we get into the commitment stage, that I'm here for life, or I'm here for a decade, or I'm here for 10 or 20 years. I think it's important we consider those decisions, because when conflict comes up, and conflict always comes up, I want us to have the option to know what those conditions are. That doesn't mean we decide when we're 2 weeks in that, if you cheat on me, I'm leaving. And then, 25 years down the road, she cheats on me, and maybe I don't want to leave anymore because I'm a different person now. That doesn't mean we can't change our mind, but have a decision. Like, just ask yourself those kinds of questions.
Right? Yeah. I love how you brought up questions. So first I wanted to say, I'm actually one of the percentage that actually has, I sleep in a different room than my husband. And that's just because he's got nocturnal habits that just, he knows, especially it started when I'd be getting up really super early. I was getting up at 5 a.m. To go into a traditional job. And he was always getting up. He would get up. He's a midnight eater. He would get up because he woke up to watch TV for an hour just to kind of fall back asleep. So his habits really didn't jive with mine. And again, it's not about being unfaithful to each other. It's just about allowing each other to have the type of sleep that's comfortable for both of us. So he doesn't feel bad about waking me. He doesn't, I'm not upset because he's waking me, that type of thing. But I love how you talked about questions, because I talk about questions a lot around mindset. And I think it's important, especially like with what I do with the mindset and the emotional awareness piece, because when something happens, we're usually responding fairly quickly. And it's usually how we feel. But most of the time, we're not really putting two and two together that there was a thought process in the middle of that. But it's so quick that we're not really aware of it. So I think it's the same thing when it comes to relationships, whether it's romantic, whether it's friendships, whether it's even like your friendships or your relationships with your peers at work or in school, whatever that looks like, is actually having not only asking the questions when you meet someone new to kind of get to know them, what kind of person they are. I truly believe, like, even maybe leading from your own core values, because you can attracts like. But I also think that it's having that thought process with yourself, like, what kind of relationship am I looking for? What are my like my non-negotiables before you get into a relationship? Because the heart can quickly take over, because again, you get into that whole honeymoon phase, like we are attracted based on specific criteria that we each have of the opposite sex, or whatever that looks like for you, an opposite person to you. But it's just having that realization that if you can have those questions answered before you seek out a romantic relationship or seeking out a friendship with a certain person, or how you engage at work with your coworkers, how you want to show up in a relationship is a good way to, like, how you actually, what you're willing to put up with and what you're willing to give. And I think that's part of it. It's like, who are you as a person? What is it that you are looking for in a relationship, whatever type of relationship we're talking about? But what is it that you're willing to give, and what is it that you are looking for, and what is a non-negotiable to you? Because those questions can help you so much when you are out and you're meeting someone for the first time, and you might be attracted to them and you might go out on a date with them, but there could be a non-negotiable that you find out in the first few weeks of being with that person. And I believe it would be a lot better to end a relationship, or at least talk about it if it's something that you want to invest in, to talk about what you're thinking and feeling around that with that other party. And if they're not receptive to it, then you've saved yourself a lot of time down the road having to figure that out.
Yeah.
But if that person is on the same page as you and they're willing to be open to discussing, especially in the early stages, so that you're not wasting each other's time. I
Right.
mean, I just think that we're adults and we should look at it life that way. It's like, when for me, like when I got married, I've been married 26 years now, and it's hasn't always been easy, but I took made a commitment to my husband. He made the commitment to me, and we know that there's going to be times where we're not going to be on the same page, but we're willing to have those conversations because we put it from the beginning. This is my expectation of a relationship. Let's communicate, regardless of whether I like what you say or you like what I say, or vice versa. We don't like it. And I
Right.
think if you can ask those questions and have that conversation in the beginning, it will lead to healthier relationships down the road. And that includes, again, friendships. That includes your friendships or your relationships with acquaintances, peers,
Yeah.
coworkers, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, and the thing is, this question that we have here, Andy, like, would you continue your relationship if they didn't change? When it comes to, I'm curious about what your thoughts are around it as a coworker or a boss. Like, how would you, what would you, I mean, because that's a different dynamic. How would
Yeah.
someone
It is
really be
completely.
able to work through that? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. It just came to me right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's exactly the question that I ended up asking myself in three different jobs. And that's why I keep bringing up to the professional ones, because I asked myself in three different jobs, I love this job. I can't stand either. One case it was the boss. Two other cases it was my coworkers. And actually, in the one where it was my boss, it was my boss and his boss and his boss. What it was my perception of the company culture as passed down from on high, and
Mm,
that's the thing I didn't like. And the way my manager and his superiors were all, you know, managing us and creating culture, I it's what I didn't like. I loved the job. It's to this day still one of my favorite jobs ever. And had the company culture been even halfway adequate, I would have never left.
mhm,
Um, and so I was asking myself those questions. What things am I willing to tolerate? And it came down to, for me, I wanted to serve my customers. I mean, I've always been a service oriented kind of person. I wanted to help them. I wanted to serve them. And for two of these three jobs, I stayed there years longer than I would have had it just been about me. Um, I was not happy. I was not supported. I was not getting what I wanted. And eventually it came down to, I also couldn't give my customers, my clients, what they wanted. Um, and that's what it came down to for me. As a matter of fact, the one where I didn't like my bosses or the culture, I ended up quitting because of my customers. I ended up quitting because I couldn't give them what they were looking for, what they were asking for, because my company didn't have it available for me to serve them in the way they wanted to be served. So I ended up quitting, and I told my boss specifically, I'm going to take my customers and leave. And in all arrogance, he said, they're not your customers anyway. They belong to the company. I'm like, okay. And it turns out that they lost a lot of business when me and another employee who thought the same way I did both left. It's funny, that other employee and I were not friends. We hated each other because we had completely opposite ways of serving customers. However, we both were customer oriented. And to this day, we're not friends. but we both left for the same reason, right? And when him and I both left, the customers he was serving and the customers I was serving also left. Those customers that never ended up going back to that company at any branch of that company, from what I understand. So it's it is that question of what are you willing to tolerate? What are you willing to put up with? What characteristics are you willing to fight through? And what characteristics are non-negotiable, right? I was willing to fight through a company who didn't treat me well as long as I thought I could treat my customers well through their services. And I did that at one company for 7 years when I hated the job almost the whole time. I mean, the honeymoon stages lasted for less than 6 months, and I was upset in that job almost the whole time. I fought with manager after manager after manager in that job, yet I thought I could serve my customers. And it wasn't until till I decided I couldn't, I decided that they really weren't serving my customers anymore. Not that I think they were in the first place. It just took a lot longer for me to understand what that actually meant. So in a professional environment, it's the same characteristics. It's what are you willing to tolerate and what are you not willing to tolerate. Just our limits look different in a friendship or professional relationship than they do in a romantic relationship. But those are the questions. What limits do you have? What are you willing to tolerate? What are you willing to negotiate? What are you willing to put up with? What are you willing to work with? And if we're willing to work with things, like you were saying a minute ago, what are we willing to give? If we're willing to give some things we wouldn't normally give, we can get some things we wouldn't normally get. If we're willing to maybe sacrifice a lower priority value, for example, treating me as optimally as I would want an employer to treat me, I was willing to sacrifice that because I could still go to work and do my job. They were still supplying the products and services I wanted to supply for my customers. So I could still feel respected. I could still feel integrity when I go to work. And therefore, I didn't need my bosses to treat me any specific way. I just needed them to get the hell out of my way and let me do my job. So I was willing to sacrifice that lower value of how they treat me so that I could have the higher value of how I treat my customers, how I serve my customers. So what are you willing to sacrifice? And I'm not suggesting you should sacrifice how somebody treats you. That was something that I personally consciously made, not out of a lack of self-esteem, but out of a desire to serve my customers no matter what. Again, this is why I call myself the unconditional coach, because I'm willing to make sacrifices the other people that many other coaches aren't willing to make in order to serve my customers, my clients in a unique way. And I'm not suggesting everybody should do that, but I'm suggesting what we should do is pick the values that are important, the ones that are at the top of the list, that are non-negotiables, and then pick some values that, if the circumstances were right, I'm willing to work around these values. Now, if the circumstances are not right, those other values, those lesser values, also become red flags as well. Like if I wasn't able to give my customers what they wanted, like that one company I was working for, I wasn't able to give my customers what they wanted, then even the lower values of treating me properly were also red flags. I was not going to stay for that either. I'm not going to make that sacrifice if I'm not getting an higher value out of it. Right. So those are the questions we ask. Those are the questions. Those are kind of the conversations that bring up this question for me is, what are you willing to put up with? What are you willing to offer? What are you willing to sacrifice? And what are you hoping to get from all of that? Because our best dreams come from not perfect situations. They come from developing perfect situations.
Yeah, it sounds like you use boundaries.
Right?
It is. It's all around the boundaries that we're willing to put for ourselves, for the people in our
Yeah.
lives, and it's not. And again, you've got this very unique way of how you implement boundaries with your clients, how you teach them,
Yeah.
and I think that can be so useful in all of our life experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think probably even though romantic relationships are extremely not fragile, but we need to be very careful with them and how, the things that we want, and being able to see that it's not, it is a give and take. But I think the relationships that are really, I think, the harder ones to navigate are the ones that, if you work in a company environment, um, it's those are the areas, I think, is really where you have to be super aware of what you're doing, the boundary, and putting those healthy boundaries in place, and being able to navigate other people's personalities. That comes down to like the emotional intelligent piece, right? Having your interpersonal skills, and how you are really like being able to um, kind of like, I guess, not only have the skill set to recognize your own emotional patterns, but recognizing other people's emotional patterns. And like you were saying, you were in a job, a couple of jobs that you didn't really like so much, but you were willing to sacrifice some of the other things that they weren't enough to push you out, so that you could serve the customers that would come in, until it became less of an environment you wanted to stay in, and just decided it was time to go. But again, that's what I love about the beauty of being able to have choices. And I also love the fact that I've never really been that person who's been like the generation before us, where, and I think even our generation still had some of these beliefs passed on, that you go to school, you either get a degree, or you go straight to the workforce, and you stay there until you retire. I've never ever like been in that model ever.
Me too.
Maybe the one model I stayed in was in the same specific field, like for 40 years in law, but I never stayed at the same law firm. I didn't stay
Right.
within the same field of law. And that wasn't because I was wanting to jump around, but I've always had a growth mindset. I've always wanted to learn. I've always wanted to experience life, and I wanted to live and not have to wait to live by staying in one particular place. And
Right.
that was, for me, it was about, not so much that that I didn't want to stay because they wouldn't change. It was because I wanted to be able to change freely.
Right.
And so changing freely to me meant being able to move to different places, being able to experience different work environments, meeting people, creating these relationships. With some of them, I've still 20 plus years, I have relationships with some of the people I used to work with.
Yeah.
And so it's really just, I think, this question around change in relationships you can like pull it in all different areas. And I just love this topic, because we were thinking about what were we going to talk about this week. I really honestly wasn't sure. And I said to him, listen, we could just say, you know what? We don't know what we're talking about today, but we're going live anyways. But, Andy's just, he really is a pretty smart guy, and always intuitive about a situation. And he just found something, life, like real life, to talk about,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
relationships and change. Because there is this perception too that people have to, adapt to their new relationships, new environments. But I also believe that it can't just be all one sided. So having this question to in your head before you make a decision, I think is very powerful. It can help you.
Yeah.
Absolutely 100% help you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly it. It's it's I think what a lot of us are missing when we get into relationships. A lot of the times we get into relationships hoping they'll have all that we desire, and that's a magical hope. And quite honestly, I blame fairy tales for that because in fairy tales, you know, especially in the older Disney fairy tales, the young lady gets into a relationship, and oftentimes she doesn't even know what she wants. And Prince Charming comes by and gives her everything she didn't even know she wanted. Um, that's just not how reality works.
Yeah.
I mean,
No.
and although consciously we know that, that's how reality works, our heart buys into that. Our heart really wants someone to know what we're looking for and give it to us. And quite honestly, us guys do it just as much as the women do. We buy into that just as much as the women do. We get into relationships hoping that she'll give us what we're looking for. And I hear story after story after story from friends and from clients and even from strangers of, I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't realize what was going to happen. And these questions can solve that problem. Like,
Mhm.
if this happens, if that happens, Google search it. You can find all kinds of things that might happen in relationships. Just do a search. And ask yourself those questions. If this happened to me, if my wife axe murdered my mother, would I stay in the relationship? I might not at that point.
I think everyone just gets to that point where, oh, I got the girl. Oh, I got the guy. Oh, I got the job. It's everything I wanted. Now it's going to be everything I have ever wanted. It's going
Yes.
to work out. But that's when turn the page and now life happens. Now real life begins, you know? And
Yeah.
I think people, I don't know what it is. It's like we've decided that, oh, I'm not turning on that side of my brain today. Nope. Nope.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Well, and not only that, but it's work
Mhm.
to turn on that side of our brain, to really to ask these questions. It's work. We like it when things just work out. I mean, we hope that things would just work out. That is our desire. That is what we want. And Hollywood's given us that. Hollywood gives us this impression, whether it's Disney or whether it's some other movies, the violent movies or the romantic movies or the dramas or whatever it is. Even the comedies give us that. They give us this idea that things just work out. When, especially the comedies, when everything's going badly, things just work out against
Mhm.
your wishes, against the pattern. Things just work out, but that isn't reality. How things work out is they make decisions similar to what you've made in your marriage. We're going to stay here, and we might not always be on the same page, but when we're not on the same page, we're going to have some conversations to see what that page looks like and see if we want to
Mhm.
get on the same page.
Yep.
Right? We're going to make an effort to be on the same page, and when we're not, we'll look at that and see what it looks like. It's not on the same page isn't suddenly a red flag to leave, right? And these are the questions we get to ask ourselves. And if we don't ask them soon enough, that's okay too. We can ask them later, right? I'm sure you didn't ask yourself these questions when you first got married 26 years ago, but you have
Mm.
been recently.
No, of course not,
Great.
because I didn't really know. And the thing is, you won't know what you don't know until you start getting into things. But I truly believe now, because mainstream is out there where people are talking about things that we're talking about. So there really is no excuse to to try to understand what it is that you truly want before you get into a relationship. In fact, there's a guy I know, he's a coach, but he has a podcast. I met him in Las Vegas, him and his wife. And one of the things I love about their story is how he knew that in order for him to have the wife he has now, he had to look at it from the perspective, okay, this is what I'm looking for. And he asked these questions and he put it down on paper. Then he reversed it and said, okay, so if that's what I am looking for, what would she be looking for? And what am I compared to that? And if I
Right.
can meet those qualities, then I can meet this girl. And he ended up meeting, they've been together a long time. They seem to be a really good match. Are they perfect? No, because there's no such thing as perfect. But
Right.
he approached it from that way. I love the fact that he approached it from asking the questions first
Yes.
before stepping into finding the girl. Oh,
Right.
you get the girl, or you get the guy, or you get the car, or you get the job, or you got the house. All of these things you think are going to make you happy. But if you haven't asked the right questions, is this really what I want? and what am I willing to give, and what am I willing to sacrifice? And when you ask those questions first, then you're like going in with your eyes wide open. When you go in only kind of like half, you have half the story, then the other half gets revealed to you later, and you're like, oh, I didn't sign up for this. So that's why I feel like I'm hoping. I don't really know a lot of relationship coaches, but I really hope that the ones that are out there talking to couples, that are making a point of talking about relationships, because I know that you do, that they are saying to them, these questions are now that you're in it, let's talk about these questions. Let's start talking about these questions and ask yourself. But I also know that if you're talking to someone who isn't in a relationship, but they're seeking that, that they also understand this is a responsibility to self. Ask these questions so that you are not disappointed by what you get because you went in without having the answers really that you were looking for. And it's not going to be
Right.
perfect, but at least if you have a starting point that's a little bit closer to what you wanted, you're more likely to succeed at getting that relationship the way you want it to be. And you'll show up that way too for the other
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly it. Um, it's you get what you want, and there's 2 points I wanted to make. First of all, I wanted to go back to your car reference for a second, but I will do that in a moment. You mentioned um, that we can. How do I want to put this? We have this concept of how we want to enter relationships. We have this concept of red flags, this concept of things we're looking out for. Um, what I've discovered when I'm asking these questions, what I've discovered is it allows me to focus on the things that I want instead of the things that I don't want. When I say what am I willing to tolerate, what am I not willing to tolerate, what am I, what characteristics that I don't like are definitely a no go, and what characteristics that I don't like can I tolerate with if I get some of the ones I really, really want, because that allows me to focus on the ones I really, really want. If I get an intelligent partner, whether that's a friendship or a business relationship or a romantic relationship, if I get an intelligent partner, I'm willing to tolerate some characteristics from that person that I wouldn't normally tolerate, because intelligence is a high value for me. If I get a person who's very, very loving, regardless of how things happen, I'm willing to sacrifice a few other characteristics, because very, very loving is a high value for me, right? Um, if and you're not going to get that in all of those qualities in the same person, right? I mean, you and I get along quite well, and I'm sure there are still qualities that are not optimum for each other, right? I'm sure there are still things that we'd rather have different. However, those priorities become far less important because the characteristics that are important are there. The values that we do have, that we do put priority on, those are there. And that's what makes our friendship such a wonderful one, our partnership such a wonderful one. And when I ask these questions, when we ask these questions of ourselves, it allows us, it frees us up, it frees our mental energy up to seek out those things that we want. And I'm going to go back to the car example you said for a moment. When you said we get the car we want, we get the relationship we want, we get the job we want. The car one it actually brought up a memory in me that just triggered something. I really like that example, because my last job that I had 6 years ago, um, I was working outside sales, and at the time I drove a truck, like a nice, large, very large engine, gas guzzling truck. And the sales area that was my sales area to travel around in required sometimes 4 or 5 hours of driving to get to some of the towns that I would sell in. So I would be driving all day, sell in that town for an hour or two, and then drive back home again. That's not optimum for a truck like that. So my wife and I decided to go out and get me a car, just a small little, like cheap little car that wasn't going to be expensive on gas and just could, make the trip and be cheap. And it turned out that we did buy a car for like $2,500. It was not a great car from some kid who painted the interior himself and done all kinds of custom work, and it wasn't a great looking car, and it wasn't a great brand either. It was just one of the cars that parents buy for their kids when they're little, right? When they're first driving. So it wasn't even even when it was brand new, it wasn't an expensive car. So, but what I loved about that car is that it was standard. I loved that, and it was the sporty version of this cheap little car. So I got to drive my cheap sports car is how I thought of it, because what the value that I liked in a car is having the control over how fast I go, when it switches gears, how it approaches the concept of power and speed, and my control over that. And because this cheap little car had those few little features in it, it didn't matter that it was painted by the kid that owned it last. It didn't matter that it was some cheap little, nothing ass car. I loved that car. It was my dream. I drove the balls out that car. And again, it's because I had some concept of what it is I wanted in a car, and I had some concept of what it is I didn't want in a car. We looked at 4 or 5 different cars and landed on this one. And even though some of the others were cheaper on gas and had a couple of other characteristics I liked, this one had the main characteristics I liked, and therefore this is the one we got. And this is how knowing what you want can change how you get what you want. Knowing what you want, knowing what you don't want, asking yourself these questions. What am I willing to put up with? What am I not willing to put up with? What am I willing to offer? What am I willing to change about myself to give them what they're looking for? I like what your friend said about this is what I want in a partner, and this is what she's going to want in me if she's the partner I want. So become that person. What am I willing to do to get the person I'm looking for, to have the friendship, the job, the relationship that I'm looking for? What am I willing to do that? What sacrifices am I willing to make? And I'm not saying you have to be in a relationship with somebody who's going to cheat on you. I'm saying, are you willing to work out a little bit? If you want a hot chick, you might want to have to work out a little bit, because she's not going to want some fat slob.
You're so funny. But it's funny that you say that, because I really truly love, like I said, I loved what James had. He talked about it, and I just found it so incredibly intuitive for such a young person. I'm
Yeah,
not saying young people are not smart, but he had already been in the self-development world. That was part of who he was, or who he is. And he's grown exponentially since then. But I really just was so impressed by it, that it and we even him and I had conversations, and I even felt like he helped me to hone in on how I could be a better wife to my husband, so that I could get those characteristics from him.
right.
Because again, to have it, I believe, to have the relationships that you want, you also have to be able to be that same thing that you're seeking for another person. Because if all you're thinking is, oh well, I like you said, I want the hot chick, but you're the couch potato who sits in front of the television watching sports all day, drinking beer, and no, but I'm just saying, as an
I know,
example,
I know,
and I'm not putting you down. I'm
I know
saying
you're not.
that
I know you're not.
if that is what you want, and you believe that she should just automatically accept you that way. And when I say sitting in front of the TV as a couch potato, what I mean is, if you're looking for the hot chick, and maybe you're saying you're looking for the hot chick who wants to do certain things, but then you don't want to show up that way to do those things with her, but you expect her to fit that mold. It's the same thing for a woman. If she's looking for the hot guy, and to me, it's like, looks are really only, as they say, skin deep. Honestly, to me, looks
Yeah.
are secondary.
Yeah. Me too.
Honestly, for me,
Me too.
I believe that what comes from the heart and the personality, you can make me laugh, you get me, we can have deep level conversations.
Yeah.
That to me brings the emotional piece into it, and it builds
Yeah.
on it. The looks piece of the equation only goes so far, because we've had this conversation before about there's a certain celebrity, and I won't say his names. I don't want to like say anything negative about anyone, but we've talked about this in the past, and I said, this person was like the person they were always talking about being a really hot guy, and as soon as he started to talk, I was like, that's it. He just killed the fantasy. And it was just because I had put such a high expectation on what I expected him to sound like, and, what he would talk about, his personality, and it just didn't meet any of the criteria that I look for in a person to be attracted to. So, yeah. But I think that when we start looking at just, like continuing in relationships that we're already in, and now we're looking outward and thinking, well, I want you to be like that. That could be a specific physical trait, or it could just be a personality trait, whatever that is, or I want you to go through self development like I did, is really not fair to the other person if you got into that relationship and how they that attracted you to them in the first place. It isn't fair for you to expect that they're going to just change like that on a dime for you.
Right.
However, and again, I think this also lends to looking back on yourself, reflect it back on yourself. Are you being all that you, if you're expecting this, are you being all of that you would want that person that you're looking for, what do you think that they would be looking for? Are you all of those things? Because if you're not all of those things, but you're expecting all of those things, that's not fair either.
Right.
So, asking the question if you'll continue a relationship if they don't change is, it's again, it has those sub level questions to it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's the next level of the question is when we ask ourselves, would you continue in the relationship if they don't change? When you go through those characteristics of what you're willing to tolerate and what you're not, what that leads to is the questions you're talking about, the circumstances you're talking about. If this is the person that I want, what characteristics are they going to be looking for? And it's not necessarily the same characteristics I'm looking for. I want to call attention to a bad trope for a moment. Um,
Okay.
a lot of people think that the attractive women want rich men. And there are, I mean, that's not a lie. There are some women who want that. It's not the majority by any stretch of the imagination, but there are some women who are like that. There are some men who think having money replaces being attractive. And there, so in that case, she might be willing to be attractive, to do the work that it takes to become attractive, to be fit and healthy and take care of herself and that sort of stuff in order to attract the man who has the financial means that she's looking for. He might be willing to put in the work it takes to have the money in order to attract the woman he's looking for. So you're not necessarily looking for the same characteristics in the other person that you have, or you're not necessarily looking for the same characteristics in yourself that you want them to have. However, the question you want to ask yourself is, what would my partner be looking for? What is
Exactly.
the person I'm looking for? What are they going to be looking for? Right? If you are this rich man or this attractive young lady who is looking for that, other partner, is that what they're looking for? Do you want the rich man who's looking for a hot chick? Do you want the hot chick who's looking for a rich man? Like that's 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 the questions, and become what you can of that. So then that leads to, well, do I want to become that guy or that girl? Do I want to do that work? And if not, maybe I'll evolve who I'm looking for to fit more with who I want to become. Right. And that's what I ended up doing. I ended up Well, I don't want, because I was in high school and I wanted all the attractive girls that were, you know, 1 or 2 grades ahead of me, and you know, of course, they never wanted to date the guys in younger grades. Um, and so I got into this, you know, situation, and I didn't know what to do with that. What I ended up doing is deciding, okay, what are they looking for? What do they want? And how can I become that? And it turns out what they're looking for was the jocks that are 2 or 3 grades older than them, and I couldn't become that. You know, I was never athletic, and I was certainly not 2 or 3 grades higher than them. I was younger than them, so I couldn't become that. So then I adjusted who I wanted to be more appropriate to the guy I wanted to be. Who am I? Who am I at my best? Who do I want to be at my best? And what women are attracted to that? And that's what I eventually later on in life figured out, is how to find the women who are attracted to who I actually am. And there are different classes of women, and I'm much happier in relationship with those kinds of women than I ever could have been with the hot
Mhm.
chick.
You're so funny. And the thing is, it's funny because I truly believe that we're all equally feeling awkward when we're in
Yes.
especially if we're looking in it for a relationship, but even in the relationship part of it, we still have those questions coming up. Like, like there's things we don't like, and is it really is it life changing? Like, I ask those questions. There's you know there's some maybe non-negotiables, but then again, like you said, some of those non-negotiables might have like a little bit of flexibility to them. I'm
Right.
not saying I'm going to be a doormat per se, but I also believe that you know sometimes it comes down to what am I willing to sacrifice in the relationship, as far as am I and is this person enough? Is this person who I want to be with? Am I willing to put in the work to see if it's salvageable? If it
Yes.
isn't, if they're not willing to change to be the person that I had hoped they would be, then you know are you doing yourself a service or a disservice by staying with this person? Then flip it on. Are you doing them a disservice by staying with them because you have a high expectation they're not willing to fulfill? So, what are you thinking to do? I'm not saying I want people to go out there and break up. That's not it. I think
Right.
really what we're both trying to say today is if you're in a relationship right now and you're dealing with things that in the first honeymoon stages of your relationship didn't bother you, but now you've settled in, you're getting very comfortable, and now these things are starting to bother you. One of the things I want you to think about is, are you looking outside of your relationship as a comparison to what your relationship is? Because you didn't get into the relationship with this person based on everybody around you, like what
Right.
they were doing, what they have. You did
Right.
it based on you, what you were attracted to and what you wanted. So if you can bring your focus back into that, that will help you ask those questions. And maybe actually what you thought was really bugging you is really not about them, but it's about you, about something about yourself that maybe you want to change. And instead of facing it, you want to deflect onto the other person. So that's another way of looking at that question, because it's not always about someone else having to change because you think they have to change or you want them to change, because maybe there's nothing to change in them, but it could be something to change in you.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe even if there is something to change in them,
Yeah,
your responsibility isn't to change them. Your responsibility is how you respond to these characteristics. Right. Yeah.
exactly.
I like that, because even if there is a characteristic in them that you'd rather they didn't have, or that you'd rather they changed, your responsibility doesn't fall on helping them understand what you need. Your responsibility falls on helping you meet your needs. And if you can do that inside of this relationship, as you have done with your marriage, you can have a pretty wonderful relationship.
Hmm.
You can be amazingly happy. And that's all I want for everybody on this planet, to be
Yep,
happy, to find joy
exactly.
and happiness. That's all we both want, all of us, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful stuff. I love this topic. I love the conversation. I love where we've gone with it. As always, we meander, we crisscross, we play off each other, we go all over the place, and it was a, as I knew it would be, a wonderful conversation. It always is. Thank
Yeah.
you, Leslie, for spontaneously only yesterday putting this up there. Um,
Like, it's been
yeah,
fun for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just gonna turn off my phone. So hold on one second.
sure. Yeah. Um, yeah. So thank you everybody for watching and for tuning in and sharing our conversation with us. And please, if you like what you're hearing, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it around, comment. Let us know what you think. Let us know your thoughts. And if there's something you'd like us to talk about, let us know. We're interested.
Yeah,
We can come up with
absolutely.
topics on our own, but we'd like to know what you want to talk about,
Yeah,
what you want to know about.
exactly. And like I said, no topic is really off limits. We want to talk about real life things. We
Yeah.
truly believe that, life isn't in a pretty little package. It is. It's just whatever is going on in our world, is affecting us in a certain way, especially in our relationships. So let's talk more openly about the things that we want. We
Yeah.
can talk about what we don't want, but we shouldn't focus on that. In fact, focus more on what you do want, focus more on what you can give, and you'll receive way back more back than you ever expected. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much, Andy. It's been a pleasure as always.
As
Thank you,
always.
everyone, for jumping in, watching it back. We appreciate you. Again, please put a comment in if there's anything that you have a question about what we discussed today, or any comments. If you have anything you would like us to talk about, again, as Andy has said, just drop it in the chat, or you can email us. If you look in the about section, you will find our emails information there. You can contact us directly, and we will be more than open to having a conversation with you. We are looking forward to going live next week. We have no idea. Yes, that's just how we roll, but we will, I promise, bring another beautiful, amazing conversation. At least I find them that way.
Me too.
They've been
Me too.
amazing. And we appreciate all of you. So thank you so much. And we will see you guys again next week. Bye for now.
Yeah. Bye bye.